Good Sunday morning. Well, Pastor Brian is still traveling, so welcome to another edition of the Layman's Library. Today we're reviewing the genealogy of Jesus, but with a little bit of caution. Caution because of what God said to Timothy through Paul in 1 Timothy chapter 1 verse 3 and 4. As I urged you when I went into Macedonia, remain in Ephesus that you may charge some that they teach no other doctrine, or give heed to fables and endless genealogies, which cause disputes rather than godly edification, which is in faith. So, the title of today's message is Jesus, Genealogy of the King. So, I want us to be careful to be reminded that this isn't a discussion about the details, the endless genealogy discussions that Paul is warning against. I won't be going line by line through every generation, but there are some interesting observations and two really important ones. But the details are in Matthew chapter 1, verse 11 through 17, and Luke chapter 3, verses 23 through 38, if you want to see all the details and all the generations. You've probably noticed that one of my main themes is that the Bible can be trusted. One of the attacks on the reliability of the Bible is the genealogy of Jesus. It's recorded in two different places, once in Matthew and once in Luke. Some non-believers say the Bible is full of errors. They can't even get the genealogy of Christ right. The two genealogies don't match. How can you trust anything in the Bible if they can't get such a simple thing right? It's true, the genealogies are different, but the non-believer's wrong conclusion is based on a superficial reading. When you look at the details, you can see there are that there are differences, and you can see how the differences are important and why. So I'm going to start with the interesting observations. There's a few of them. For one, the genealogies are the same from Abraham to King David. Luke records the family tree all the way back to Adam, but Matthew, and they both include Abraham to King David. Second observation is Joseph apparently has two different fathers. That's one of the main objections. They're different. Matthew has Jacob as Matthew's biological father, and Luke lists Heli, Mary's father, Joseph's father-in-law. Um, so those are kind of two immediate observations. So let's start with Jesus's family tree before King David. The lines, as I just said, the lines are the same all the way down to King David. Um, Joseph through Solomon, the firstborn um, of Bathsheba, the first surviving son of Bathsheba, is the royal line. Solomon, from King David to Solomon's first son, would be the kingly line. And Mary's lineage can be traced through Nathan, the second born of Bathsheba. Both sides share kinship with King David. Both Mary and Joseph's lineage include Boaz. Boaz was the son of Rahab. You may remember Rahab was the Canaanite prostitute that saved the spies in Jericho when the Israelites were first moving in to take the promised land. She risked her life and put her trust in God, and God redeemed her from prostitution, and she became an ancestor of Jesus. It's not often that genealogies of that time list women in any of the records, but here Rahab, a converted Canaanite, is listed as one of Jesus's grandmothers, great-great-grandmothers. Also on both sides, we have Obed. Obed is the son of Boaz through Ruth. Ruth was the Moabite widow of Naomi's son, and Ruth ended up putting her faith in God and converted to Judaism. So here we have two stories of two women, two Gentile women, who converted to Judaism, and they're both part of Jesus's family tree. David's great and great-great-grandmothers came from people groups that were enemies of God. That would be Ruth and Rahab. The evidence of God's willingness to include all people in his plan of redemption is pretty clear. It's in Jesus' family tree, and it's one of the main goals of his calling is to include all people in the kingdom. Another interesting thing about Boaz, as he is a kinsman redeemer, his marriage with Ruth is what's called a Levirate marriage in Leviticus. When a relative dies and leaves a widow with no sons, a relative who's able and willing marries that woman to bring forth sons and keep the now dead husband's family name alive. So in this case, there was a closer relative, but Boaz became the kinsman redeemer because he was willing, and the other closer relative wasn't. It was the custom back then to have these discussions and in essence negotiate a contract in a public meeting. And at the time, after Boaz finally agreed to be kinsman redeemer for Ruth and Naomi, all the people prayed for this union to be a blessing. But it ends in a little bit of an odd fashion. The blessing ends with a reference to an even more distant relative, Perez. In Ruth chapter 4, verse 12, this is described. These are the words that describe the prayer of the town leaders that witnessed this agreement. May your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring which the Lord will give you from this young woman. So who was Perez? Perez, born of Tamar. At this point, you can probably start relaxing if you think your family tree is a mess, because this part of Jesus' genealogy is pretty messy. Perez is the son of Judah, who was the head of the tribe of Judah, the tribes named after Judah. Tamar was the wife of Judah's oldest son. And Onan was the second son, who were both wicked, and the Lord killed them both because of their wickedness. And Tamar was left without children, and the husband she should have had was withheld by Judah because Judah was afraid that he would die also. But by Levirate law, Judah should have given Shelah, his third son, to marry her, but he didn't. So Tamar pretended to be a prostitute to trick Judah into providing a son for her, and Perez was the result of that union. In the end, Tamar was called more righteous than Judah. I think the reference to Perez in Boaz's blessing is really a reference to Boaz being more righteous than the closer relative, because the closer relative refused his role as the redeemer, and Boaz stepped up and redeemed the family, and that ultimately became part of Jesus's family line. So after King David, There's a long line of good and righteous kings. There's a few bad apples here and there. But in time, I'm not sure how to say it, Jeconiah was the last king of Judah. He was an evil king, and he was the king at the time Babylon invaded, and he was carried away because he ignored repeated warnings from God, and because he was so wicked and so bad a king, God actually put a curse on his family line. In Jeremiah 22, verse 30, Jeremiah records, "Thus says the Lord, write this man," and he's referring to Jeconiah, "write this man down as childless, a man who shall not prosper in his days. For none of his descendants shall prosper, sitting on the throne of David and ruling any more in Judah." So God basically put an end to King David's line as a king. Babylonian invasion ended the monarchy in Judea, and King David's line was cut off. It's also interesting that both genealogies meet again at Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel was the governor of Judah when the temple was being rebuilt at the end of the exile. Jewish tradition has that the royal line of David continued through Zerubbabel, but for all practical purposes, the monarchy had ended with Jeconiah, and Zerubbabel was really a governor. He wasn't a king, but they hold that David's kingly line passes through Zerubbabel. The family, Mary's and Joseph's family lines split again with the two sons of Zerubbabel. Joseph's line passes through Abiud, and Mary's line passes through Raisa. So, does that mean Satan won? It's the end of the royal line, and God's promise to David, recorded in 2 Samuel chapter 7:16, is broken. In 2 Samuel, Samuel prophesies, God gives the message to Samuel, "When your days," speaking of David, "are fulfilled and you rest with your father, I will set up your seed after you who will come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne in his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he shall be my son. If he commits an iniquity, I will chasten him with the rod of men and with the blows of the sons of men. But my mercy will not depart from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I removed it from before you. And your house and your kingdom shall be established forever before you. Your throne shall be established forever." And there's no way God's going to break his promise. So how can the line of David be broken and God keep his promise? The question is, what would it take for Jesus to be the rightful king of the Jews, given all that we've just learned about the genealogy? And how do we know that he's the king? Well, the king of the Jews must meet two requirements. He has to be Jewish, and he has to share a royal bloodline to David. This leads to two important observations from these two genealogies we've been talking about. First one is easy. Jesus is Jewish is because his mom was Jewish. All Jewish movements through history agree that a person can be a Jew either by birth or through conversion. And according to Jewish law, not the law of Moses that we have in the Torah, but their civil law, if you're Jewish by birth, then you must be born of a Jewish mother. Mary was Jewish, so Jesus is Jewish. That's pretty easy logic to see. But this brings us to the importance of the two genealogies. The more difficult question is a traceable royal bloodline back to David. No matter how you look at it, Jesus is king through Joseph. As Joseph's adopted son, Jesus would have been considered part of Joseph's family and the rightful heir to all of Joseph's authority, all of Joseph's family rights, and all the privileges that go with it. Legal and kinship standing was related to either genes or adoption or marriage. That's how Jews reckoned their family lines. According to Jewish civil law back then, there are two ways this could work. Option one, even though Jesus didn't share Joseph's DNA, as Joseph's adopted son, he would have been David's legal royal heir through Solomon. Some scholars hold that the blood curse on Jeconiah's family, which is David's royal bloodline, only lasted for a generation or two. Even though the monarchy has ended, Jesus is still the legal heir to the throne, which is consistent with the genealogy recorded in Matthew. Other scholars hold that the blood curse is permanent and all future heirs are disqualified to be king. Well, the second option is that Mary didn't have any brothers. If Mary didn't have a brother, her father's inheritance would have to go outside the family. This is exactly what happened to the daughters of Zebaniah, recorded in Numbers 36, verses 2 and 3. The Lord commanded my Lord to give the land by lot to the sons of Israel as an inheritance. And my Lord has commanded the Lord to give the inheritance of Zelophehad, our brother, to his daughters. But if they marry one of the sons of the other tribes of Israel, their inheritance will be withdrawn. So here God is giving property rights to women, but it's linked to the tribe of their husband. Ideally, the goal is to marry a man from within your own tribe to keep the land in your tribe. The way this was executed is the woman's father, now the new father-in-law, would adopt his son-in-law into the family as his son. Now the adopted son has all the legal rights and kinship standing of his new family. That means Joseph would have been adopted by Mary's father, Heli, which is consistent with the genealogy recorded in Luke. Since the blood curse broke the royal line through Solomon's firstborn, the line of succession naturally shifted to Solomon's second son, which leads to Mary's father, to Joseph next, and then to Jesus. Whether through Jesus' bloodline or through Joseph's marriage adoption, Jesus is king. He's fully Jewish, and he has a bloodline that traces to David. Jesus, the rightful king of the Jews. Jeremiah chapter 23, verse 5 and 6 records the following. Behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, that I will raise to David a branch of righteousness. A king shall reign and prosper, and execute judgment and righteousness in the earth. In his days Judah will be saved, and Israel will dwell safely. Now this is his name by which he will be called, the Lord our righteousness. So far, all we've been considering are the two genealogies of Jesus through Mary and Joseph. That's all most of us have. But Jesus, there's a third genealogy. We can take Paul's advice and avoid the endless discussions of genealogy by focusing on the simple genealogy, the one that matters the most, found in John chapter 1. In John 1, verse 1 and 14, the third genealogy goes like this. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and he held his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. It's the simplest genealogy ever. God, Jesus, us. This is the genealogy that we're encouraged to talk about all day long, every day if we can. It's the only genealogy that matters. Now go out and serve your King.